Welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chaney podcast. My name is Nathan Chaney, and I am the host for today's conversation with Karl Taft, who is located here in the Dallas, Texas area where I'm at. And we kind of bumped into each other digitally on LinkedIn the other day. And I noticed that he has a unique skill set and perspective, specifically kind of focusing on merger and acquisition advising, but with an actual logistics and trucking and transportation and engineering background, really quite varied and diverse sort of experiences. And of course, when I meet anybody like that, I'm like, the first thing I think is, let's bring this person on the podcast and pick their brain a little bit. So Karl, thanks for hopping on today, stepping up to the plate and sharing some of your experience and expertise. Can I hand the digital microphone over to you for a second and let you to introduce yourself in a little bit more detail?
Oh, yeah, sure. Hey, thanks for having me, Nathan. Great to be here. So Karl Taft, originally from Hawaii. I've started and sold several businesses over my 20-year entrepreneurial journey. And the last business which connected us was a 30 power unit bulk liquid transport company based out of Ohio. So I think that's how our deals crossed. But after selling that business, I basically sold it to my partner. I wanted to help more entrepreneurs because I think that entrepreneurs, it's easier for them to start a business than it is to exit a business. So I like to be a guide in that journey.
Yes, that whole idea of what am I going to do with this whole thing that I've built, which is, I think it's like an existential question that I'm starting to learn that maybe your first time entrepreneur doesn't start with the end in mind and just kind of just starts to start. And then I think probably like your more serial entrepreneurs think, okay, here's the purpose and the end result I want. Now I'll go build this. But let's unpack that more later. But let's first talk a little bit more about Karl, the surfing Hawaiian who somehow landed in Texas. Tell me a little bit more about your upbringing.
I'm not the one with the water backdrop. Karl from Hawaii, the only Hawaiian that you will meet that probably doesn't know how to surf because I like to say I was slave labor for the family business, right? So from the time I was 14, as soon as school ended, we're working in the business. Weekends, we're working in the business. So, just through osmosis, I've always been around that entrepreneur mindset. So then when I go to college in Oregon and I get a chemistry degree and I'm working for somebody, the whole time I'm thinking, I got to start a business. I just got to get into it and do my own thing. Like there's something missing. And so ultimately I worked for 5 years as in W-2. And then after that, I had a 25-year career as an entrepreneur, just doing that.
Wow.
So island life was great. I have a farmer's tan usually because it's typically like, that's all we did. Like, so for your listeners, my family business was painting roads, guardrail, signs, drywall, excavation, that sort of thing, renovating houses. So yeah, it's jack of all trades, if you will.
Okay. All right. That's a necessary part of holding a civilization together is making sure that everything's painted and taken care of and built. What got your family into that business in the first place?
Yeah, my father came over to Hawaii, in the 60s, I think, during Vietnam, and he's a farm boy from Utah. Head down, butt up, as I like to say. And after he got out of the military, he worked for somebody for a good, I don't know how many years he was there, maybe 5 or 10. And then he got the bug to basically start a business. But a lot of the business was just driven off of, as many entrepreneurs face, right? They're like, man, I need to make some money. I need to establish a better life for myself. I'll go start a business. Right. So he hops into the business and he starts that business. And both my parents fell in love with that business. And as the only child, I was heir apparent. Right. I was supposed to take over the business. We had a bunch of those conversations as a teenager and in my early 20s. I don't want to take over that business. Right. And then I didn't want to live in the middle of the Pacific, which is cool, but it's also has its issues. Ultimately, so when I did that, my parents just at some point decided to shut the business down, which is, you see that a lot here, but there is a path out, right? There is a way, there is a market, there are buyers that are interested in that business, no matter what type of business you have. Kind of to your point, you said, entrepreneurs fall in love. I think that's very true. The first business you kind of fall in love with, The second and third business, you know why you started the business, right? To make money and exit. Because every entrepreneur, every owner will have an exit, right? They will exit their business one way or another.
Interesting. The university that I went to, I want to say about maybe 10 years ago or so, came out with this family business concentration in their school of business,
Cool.
which was like for families to like send their kids to, these kids would be kind of maybe being prepped for moving in and into the family business.
I think it's amazing. I'm envious of those that can do it.
Uh-huh.
100%. And I did it for a good decade, on and off with my parents too. But at some point I recognized, man, I'm going to have to fire my dad. I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to tell my mom she's not doing a very good job, and,
Mm-hmm.
and that's, yeah, you see that a lot today too, right? An entrepreneur will grow to the size of their fish tank. That fish tank is usually time or skill set, right? They fill it up. They're really good, but then they don't see a way to kind of get to that next level. And that's usually, the catalyst to say, I'm ready to sell. Right. And so you bring in fresh blood, maybe, a different skill set, somebody that's willing to lean into those headwinds and take it to the next level. And my business was no different. So that's great. At the cohort at your university, they had that. Like, okay, how to fire mom, how to deal with dad. No, I'm kidding. But I mean, it's awesome if you can do it. And I still see people out there that do it and do it well. I just couldn't do it.
So how many years did you spend there on in the islands, I guess? And then what got you out of there? Was it going to school? Is that eventually what ultimately got you out to the
Yeah.
middle of the Pacific?
Born and raised. Yeah. And to my parents' credit, they're like, you can go to college anywhere you want as long as it's not Hawaii. Get out the rock, like go see the world, go do something. Like it's a big place out there. It's not an island in the middle of the Pacific. And so that's why I went to the Northwest, far, but not far.
Okay. And decided to study something not necessarily in the family business line of work.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted a job, right? So what's a good job? Well, I'll be a doctor. I go to college. My advisor's like, more chemistry majors get into medical school than biologists. I'm like, oh, that was my favorite class in high school. I'll go do that. And then, you start prospecting, right? Like we do as entrepreneurs, like, oh man, if I'm going to be a doctor, I better volunteer at the emergency room or some medical office and figure out if this is what I really want to do. I figured out in like 2 weeks, this is not what I want to do.
Yeah.
So then what, right? Get a master's in chemistry, and my first job is working for basically an R&D arm of an aerospace company. We're making jet engine parts. I'm basically slave labor for a bunch of PhDs that are a whole hell of a lot smarter than me. But I learned a lot, like their mindset, their thought process, how to make things faster, cheaper, safer, basically affecting the bottom line. And that was a lot of fun.
Sure. And probably a great starting point to think about as you engineer and design and build businesses, having that engineering mindset.
Yeah.
That definitely, I'm quite jealous of those folks that have engineering undergrads with an MBA. I think that they are like the ultimate sort of race in the business world.
Yeah, mine works pretty
Yeah.
pretty amazingly. Yeah. And I use that kind of skill set. I mean, the first business I started, we invented basically a polymer that we used in alternative energy called a fuel cell. So it was a key component of that. That was 10 years of 100-hour weeks, but ultimately we went public on NASDAQ, which is pretty cool. Did that for a couple of years and, really cut my teeth with with a small team, and every individual on that team was extremely skilled. It was a great group to work with. Probably one of my most fondest memories in business, honestly.
So in that story, which you just went through in like 20 seconds of, oh, by the way, I started up a new thing, invented it, went public and all that sort of stuff. Like, just another day at the office. So talk a little bit more about sort of, you didn't have a business degree, but you kind of grew up in the world of business and entrepreneurship, seeing your parents. So can you talk about some of the highlights and lowlights, I guess, of that experience of going through that, building that first business?
Sure. I would say that it was one of those things as an entrepreneur where we just think about like, okay, if we're going to be successful, there are people out there that have more money than us. There are people out there that are smarter than us. There are people out there that have a better network than us, but nobody's going to outwork us. And, you have to bring something to the table that is your thing. And when you don't have anything, the one thing you have is like grit and drive, right? And I'd say that if you have grit and drive, you can compete. I mean, we used to say we'd eat Harvard MBAs for lunch. And, that's a little cheeky, but, when you're okay in leaning into that pain or leaning into the fire, you can do a lot. And I think for entrepreneurs, it's never a linear trajectory, right? It's not from A to B and it's diagonal like this, right? It's usually like blood, sweat, and tears, a little bit of progress. Blood, sweat, and tears, a little bit of progress, right? And it steps up. And that's what that business was like. It was always going to the next safe harbor of progress, right? Whether that was a government grant that gave us credibility that brought our investors in, to our first customer, to our first, technical milestone. We're always just moving the ball down the field, and keeping everybody sane, right? No mutiny on the boat, right? Like we're all making progress. It's all happening. There's a little bit of an art to that, but it was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of stress. It was a lot of sacrifice. And I would have to say that, I mean, for your listeners that are going through the entrepreneurial journey or contemplating it, the factor that I lean into most, even today when I meet people and they have like big ambitions, yes, their skill set matters, but a lot of times it's the family's skill set too. What's their support network like? They have a good support network, right? Behind every great man, there's a great woman, or you can flip that around. It really matters, right? Like when you can just double down, put your head down, like my dad used to say, head down, butt up, and just go and know that when you get home, it's not going to be like, why did you work late? What are you doing? Those extra stresses, that there's a support for you to kind of focus on what you need to do for the greater, let's call it family good. And that's an arguable point depending, right? But if everybody in the family is aligned with this mission and this goal, it can really make things a lot easier.
I really appreciate the concept that you've kind of hit on, which is grit. And I can see it in what you'd kind of described as your farmer's tan upbringing, working in the family business in construction and painting and all this sort of good stuff. Yeah. I have a similar type of, raised on the farm out in East Texas with cows and horses and cleaning fence lines and painting fence lines and building barns and all that sort of good stuff. Yeah. And I feel like that, that really at the time would have never thought, oh, this is going to help me be, if you want to say successful in life, different definitions of success out there, I suppose. But that this grit and this ability to wake up when the sun comes up and work until the sun goes down, and get through it and then wash, rinse, and repeat and do it again the next day. Yeah. That is this personality and this character building thing that happens fortunately, or for some folks that can help, open doors and help them to be, who they become later on in life. Yeah. And that whole like working harder, sometimes you can work smarter. That's good. But sometimes it just takes harder working to outwork your competitors or to last.
I think about the Edison light bulb, right? Like how many filaments are you going to go through, right? You just, every no is one step closer to yes, right? But you still got to go through that process.
Yep. I like the James Dyson, story as well. The 1,000, 1,500 sort of prototypes of that first vacuum as well. So one question, I've had a number of founders and folks on, and one piece of advice that I got was, don't go it alone. Try to have a co-founder or someone that comes along with you, so you've got that buddy system going on. What's your view on that?
It can be amazing, right? You go farther in a group than you go by yourself, right? You want to go fast, you go by yourself, right? And being an only child, being that, I'm really good, and people that know me well are like, yeah, that guy, like that guy that can forget everything and just go. But there is something to be said about that support network. It's lonely at the top, right? And a lot of people don't understand what it takes to sacrifice the stress, the highs and lows. And it's nice to bounce some things off of somebody. And I mean, I've gone through therapy. I've gone through, Entrepreneurs Organization, which I think is, Alcoholics Anonymous for entrepreneurs at some point, right? There's strength in being able to talk and, run ideas off of people. And I think having that partner is amazing. But for the listeners out there too, like, just be careful with partners, right? Because partners are good until they're not good. And I'm not saying that all my partners were bad. I actually had some great ones, but I also had some bad ones. And, if you don't have the structure set up that if and when something happens, what do you do next? And we can get into this later. I have some clients, same thing, right? 50-50, no buy, sell. One person is doing more than the other, and now there's animosity, right? It's okay, maybe month 3, month 6, but in year 6 it becomes a problem.
It kind of feels like it may be smart to have like a mediator, third party in there, just to like a couples therapist, at times, just to help like provide a unbiased sort of perspective from the outside.
Yeah.
Like, come on, guys, like, y'all like each other. Here's what you should.
Remember when you guys used to go fishing together or whatever it is?
Yeah,
for sure, 100%.
So you had that first entrepreneurial experience. Maybe kind of walk through what kind of came after that. What have you been up to since then?
Yeah, sure. So, I was, so for what it's worth, right, for your listeners, this might matter. I was asked to resign from a public company, and I did, right. And it was the best thing ever, right? It was the best thing ever because now I was no longer an insider. I can sell my stock on the open market with no permission within 90 days. I don't have to work the 100 hours a week and all these things. There's all this benefit. I could spend more time with my family, but it was still, even though it was, a good thing for me, it was like somebody ripped my heart out. And it was still part of my identity. And as the first business, it was hard to separate that, I think. I thought I was going to take all this time off. Literally in 2 weeks, started another business. I think I left the first business like around Thanksgiving. Like before Christmas, I was already like, just head down. Like, here we're going to go, the next thing. And that was licensing a cancer drug from a university and trying to solve the chemical problem to make it efficacious enough to get into phase 1. Of an FDA process. And in that process of doing everything that entrepreneurs do, and with my background, I'm renovating labs and I'm hiring chemists and I'm trying to develop things and I'm writing patents and going through this whole process. And I have a epiphany. During renovation, I almost killed myself, basically. Long story short, cut through some live power, blow the circuit breakers. I still have the Sawzall blade in my office somewhere that I melted as a reminder that there are more things in life. There are more important things in life than just hammer down, right? Head down, butt up. And sometimes it's working smarter, not harder. I know what I said earlier about, outwork everybody, but, to a point. And when that happened, and my youngest son was 2 at the time, it got me to reflect, like, I had the previous IPO route. I was trying to do another venture route, like type business. And it was hard swinging for the fences to try to go for a really big valuation where you're worth nothing. And so ultimately I decided, you know what, I'm going to try and sell and make something that somebody buys every day. And so I was in Hawaii at the time. That journey and that discovery brought me to Dallas, Texas. We had one marquee chemical, and I built a suite of chemicals around it. And we took that company from nothing to significant amount of sales. I took a trucking company with that because we're shipping bulk liquid chemicals. If you're going to go on the open market to buy chemical or ship chemicals, it was $8 a mile, but I could at my cost was like $1.70 a mile. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy into a trucking company and grow that. We did. Sold the chemical company. The acquirers did not want the trucking company. I just call it and makes them smart. Or strategic, which is great. And so, as many entrepreneurs did, I was faced with a partner in the trucking company, 3 or 4 trucks, and we said, "Well, now what?" And I didn't really reflect on, is this right for me? I just said, "Oh, I'll just grow this business. It's in front of me. Like, let's go do it." So we took that company from 3 trucks or 4 trucks to 30 trucks, about. We went through COVID. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And then at some point, I asked my partner to buy me out. We went through an exit process, and in that process discovered maybe there's a pathway for me to help other entrepreneurs, sell or exit their business. And that's ultimately what I do now. Did that answer your question, Nathan? I'm not sure if I did what I did earlier with the IPO, just kind of, Jedi mind trick you and be really quick about things, but hope that addressed.
No, that was great. I to some degree, these podcasts that I do, at least in this middle section of talking through your resume, it's a lot like being interviewed for a job. It's like, tell me, about your professional experiences and stuff, but I think it's, the goal here is to inspire people and educate people and let people hear other people's stories, for the good stuff and the bad stuff. Because sometimes the good stuff helps inspire. And sometimes when you tell people about the failures and the setbacks, I think it helps people understand that, oh, well, if this guy or this girl had issues and setbacks, maybe I'm going to get through this dark time I'm in right now myself.
Gotcha.
So you what's funny is, obviously I am a little bit focused on the supply chain, and transportation is a big part of that. And so what kind of caught my eye when I was looking at your profile was this trucking piece of the business. So maybe could you deep dive just a little bit into what that experience was like, going from a chemistry engineer to now being a trucking fleet owner? How did, what were some good stories or like lessons learned there, like in the transportation industry?
Yeah. What would be my takeaways? Relationships are key. Yes, in trucking, you can compete for cents per mile, but that's a bad move, right? We want to compete on service, professionalism, safety record, whatever you want to call it, on-time performance. Like that's what I want to deal with. And as you well know, right? Like with your experience, we talked about this previously. Like, I want to ship things where the cost of something not showing up on time really is expensive. Forget the cost per mile. That'll get baked into the fact that if I'm not there when I say I'm going to be there, production shuts down or something like that, right? Like that's the kind of customer I want. And that's the kind of relationship I want, right? Where it's symbiotic, that they know that when we say we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And then we can grow from that. It becomes a platform or a toehold, if you will, right? To step on and then grow upwards with. That's a lot of fun. And I like being collaborative in business, right? Like we talked about partners and talking to each other. Well, partnerships can come in many forms, right? I want those partnerships outside of the organization as well, right? Like where it's just key and we're really jiving off of each other and I know what they want and vice versa, and we can grow it together. That would probably be the biggest lesson I had in trucking. Of course, we can get into the other side of things, which is like safety records and drug testing and all those things that flush out into better performance. Like, for instance, if there are any trucking listeners out there, logistics guys, hair follicle, way to go. Hair follicle and cameras. That's the way to be. We've saved so much lost run issues by people trying to run us off the road, and we have the footage, or now there's no unexplained reasons why there's weird driver behavior because we hair follicle and we know our drivers are obviously substance abuse free, at least with the things we measure. That was a real eye opener for me. Like when we started changing the game and making sure that maybe what we did operationally fed into what we wanted the outcomes to be. We want safe drivers. So what does that mean? okay, well, we better do better background checks. We better do better drug testing. We better do some better training, right? And when we did those things, the proof was in the pudding, and that made things a lot better for us. Yeah.
I like it. I like it. So that you did not exactly have a background in transportation and trucking. So did that partner that you partnered with, is that what they brought to the table? How did that work?
Yeah, I love Ray. So yeah, Ray and I connected. He was an owner operator, and he at one point in time, so just one truck, but lifestyle business for him, right? It wasn't broke. He wasn't fixing it. All was good. I'm like, man, let's grow the trucking business together. And so, we did. And, when the things with the chemical business, separated, then I'm like, well, Ray, what do you want to do? You want to grow more? And he's like, look at all this opportunity. So I said, okay, let's grow more. And that's ultimately what we did. Yeah. So together, we had two companies, right there. So there was an asset holding company, and then there's an operation company, just so there's some legal protections between the entities, if you will. Ray was a 51% owner of the operating company. I was a 51% owner of the asset company, primarily because I was pouring cash into the asset companies to grow it. And then we just grew them simultaneously, right? Add trucks, add drivers, add accounts. And at some point, right, I alluded like, man, and the partnership was great. Actually, I should mention that to the listeners. Like Ray and I still, when he's down here, truck drive. When you own a truck driving company, sometimes you still drive trucks, and so Ray still hops in the truck. And once in a while, I see him here. And I think it was in the last month or so, we hooked up in Texas and had a beer and a steak, and it was nice to catch up. And still friends. One of the partnerships that I think was good for me, and we still talk to each other about our ups and downs. But yeah, at some point I said, you know what, the business is great, but the business is not for me. And I think I would be better served, and I would serve the community, if you will, and the universe more if I could take my skill sets and teach them to others. One of the things we didn't talk about. So I am the geeky chemist with an MBA, right? The engineer, right? So, but my MBA was in supply chain management, and I thought I was going to become a professor. I love teaching. It's kind of a thing I like to do. I taught a couple of classes at Portland State University. I said, yeah, I like teaching, but I don't like this type of teaching. And so then ultimately, just went through my entrepreneurial journey. But now that I'm where I'm at now, I really like teaching entrepreneurs and owners like about exits, about positioning, about value. And the first, I guess, the N of one was when Ray bought me out. So when Ray bought me out, we went through this process. We actually had a different buyer on the table. I'm watching Ray go through that process of maybe not ready to sell to a third party. And so then ultimately he bought me out. So we went through these two processes, and that's really what galvanized, like, okay, I think there's something here to help other owners, and I want to do more of that.
Sure. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. But just before we depart from the transportation sort of piece of the conversation, I feel like your decision to look at your cost at $8 a mile, or your ability to do it in-house and in-source at $1.50 or whatever, that whole like make or buy sort of decision. Can you kind of talk through that just a bit for folks who might be thinking, there's this supplier or this partner that I've got that I could do it cheaper myself? Any lessons learned? It seems like it worked out for you, but any thoughts on that make or buy decision?
Yeah, it wasn't just price. I mean, price matters, right? But it was type of service, right? So for your listeners out there, I just did not have an out and back type of route, right? Where I make at a production facility, we're in Richardson, and deliver to point A, right? It wasn't that shipment. And so I needed somebody to pick up at origin and then go to A and drop 10%, B and drop 20%, and C and D, and drop some things. So I could go to basically different asphalt plants and fill up the chemical that I was selling to them on open PO. And what that would require, because they were in operations, all these asphalt plants, they needed the product now. right? So because they needed the product now, there's two things that were kind of counter to, or that really drove the decision for us to get into trucking. One was time. So if I said, hey, I need you to pick up here at this time and deliver at these places at those times in this sequence, it just made the cost go crazy. In addition, it was very hard for any third-party carrier to service that type of an account. So it was easier, and the process was Ray was really driver one. I was driver two, so I have my Class A tanker as well. As an entrepreneur, you do everything, right? So I'm making chemicals, I'm shipping chemicals. Ray's doing the same thing. It just didn't seem realistic enough. I mean, put this cost aside for now, but it didn't seem realistic enough for us to go to a third party carrier and have the same driver do it every time, because there was training involved, when we needed it, at the price we needed it at. Couple that with, we were shipping chemicals that were worth $4 a gallon, right? So 4,000, like the tanker was like $16,000, but my freight bill would have cost like $8,000. So it was just like, it was too upside down. So it was easier to go buy a $40,000, used semi truck and a $40,000 tanker, and depreciate and amortize those costs, put a driver in it, and then put it into rotation. And then when that driver wasn't doing our stuff, right? Because it was like, let's call it every other week or every third week to start, right? I mean, you're not doing it every day, but when you're starting and you're like, okay, well, now what do? I just did this thing for 2-3 days. Well, now you can use that asset and go make money, right? So that was the decision process that led us into, okay, I'm going to buy into a trucking company. It's can I manage it? Do I have the capabilities to manage it? What does that look like? And I think for me as the entrepreneur, I didn't understand the regulatory part of it. Like, not that I couldn't have learned it, but that's where Ray was very helpful in that process, just because he'd lived it for a couple of decades.
I'm pretty darn sure you're the first and only chemistry engineer MBA/CDL holder that I'll ever have on the podcast.
There you go.
So that's really cool, and it's such a testament to the concept of an entrepreneur that's just got to be a little gritty and get your hands dirty and wear all of the hats.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward to kind of the Karl of today and what you keep yourself busy with these days.
Cool. Yeah. So after helping Ray exit, if you will, and he didn't exit, but he helped me exit, right? So we went through the separatory process. There's some things that came out of that. There was a broker on another side, and he said, man, you'd be really good at this. I said, what do you mean this? He said, well, selling businesses, value businesses, like walking through, like you kind of understand the dynamics. You've been in industry. And I thought, I have been, and then my, that kind of core competency or superpower, whatever you want to call it, of teaching kind of appealed. I'm like, man, I could actually be a teacher and help owners do this. Okay, great. Because I think it's easier. I think I said this earlier. It's easier to start a business than it is to exit a business. I mean, at least for me personally, I can say that when I was in the chemical company or in other, even in the public company, I'm thinking like, how do I ever get out of here? Like, how do I ever leave? What does that look like? Because you get so ingrained and just locked into what you're doing. It's hard to kind of come up for air and say, no, this is how I'm going to exit. And I see that all the time now. And I like to be that guide, if you will. I think I've used this term a few times, but if I can show somebody, here's the process to sell a business. Here's what your business is likely going to value at. Here's how the banking structure or the deal structure is likely going to look. And here are the things that you can do to maybe get more value or to appeal to more buyers, i.e. maybe you get a higher price between now and whatever your horizon is, right? Whether it's 6 months or 6 years. That's a lot of fun, right? That's just arming people with information and enabling them to have that exit that they, frankly, built their business to achieve at some point.
Thinking about it, I just had we just had a rental house and went through the process of fixing it up.
Yeah.
And we rented it for some years, and then we wanted to sell it, and because I wanted to focus on this business and not other stuff.
Sure.
And so I think this is like going to be really, I hope, a parallel to an idea of a business and an owner exiting, which was, we knew that there's going to be a pretty big payday coming down the road. And the better job we did preparing the house and doing some improvements and getting it ready to go, that the better it was going to show. And so we were like really quite open to the idea of making some investments and spending some money because we knew there would be a return at the end. So to me, and if I think about someone like you that's advising someone who's looking to make that exit and sell, there's this kind of like payday coming down the road. So it seems like they should be pretty inclined to spending some money, investing in having an expert by their side to help make sure to, you know, extract the most value there. And so it seems to me like the money and what there is easy. It feels to me like the harder problem that you maybe have to solve is how do you get in front of those people that are in the market for selling and the marketing piece of your business. How do you go about that?
Yeah, 100%. I go on podcasts. I tell everybody what I do. And I love your analogy. Like, I love it. Like, you know, flat out. That's right. Right. The business is the house in the neighborhood that it's in, on the street that it's in. That's the business. So that's a plumber. That's an electrician. That's a truck driving, you know, that's a trucking company, right? There's certain things that limit it. If the house is in that zip code, it's not in Beverly Hills. It is what it is, right? But what can you do to improve that? Well, you can paint it, you can fix the yard. Okay, great. And then what are the metrics that drive value, right? Well, bedrooms give you X amount, bathrooms, right, give you more, right? So there's, okay, how many beds, baths? Well, can we add a bedroom? Can we add a bathroom? Can we do that? What's our time frame to do that, right? Selling a business is no different, right? Like, are you the business or do you have a manager? How absentee are you? You know, what's your total, what's the total benefit of a sales or a customer? How long does it take you to get that? What's your recurring revenue numbers? How much customer concentration, employee concentration do you have? Like, all those things kind of go into it. And of course, profitability and sales ratios and those types of things, right? But it's very similar. The challenge is there's not a real Zillow or the metrics that go into Zillow, right? Based on zip codes, bathrooms, bedrooms, square footage. It's not the same for businesses. Businesses, there's a lot more ambiguity and variability, if you will, in value. And that's where people like us come in, right? Where it's one thing to look on Zillow and be like, well, that is selling for, you know, X. My business should sell for X. But then you don't realize, like, yeah, but you're the only person in that business, right? You've done a great job. How do we get you to a place where, you know, the market will really respond positively to what you've built or spent your life building, right? And what are the steps that are needed to take? So a lot of times with prospective clients, right? I say prospective because a majority of my time, to your point is how do I market, is just having informational conversations, right? I like to arm people with what I call a pricing and sales strategy session. Let's just have a conversation, right? And then if what comes out of that conversation is you need a line of credit to grow, right, to add the bedroom or the bathroom, you really could use a coach to help you with, you know, your strategy, your go-to-market strategy, or how do you upsell somebody if you're a plumber, whatever, to an accountant or a tax strategist, to a marketer, to, you know, whatever the owner needs, right? A good probing question I like to ask owners is, you know, forget selling for a minute, just put it to the side. If you could do anything and not fail, what does that look like? Right? And then that's a real telltale into maybe what you can do to increase the value. If it's like, I have employee issues, that's one thing. I need to bring in more sales, that's another thing, right? I want to go in this direction and it's a strategic maybe add-on to the business, that's another thing. But, you know, if you could do anything you wanted to, what would that be? Again, getting owners out of that fishbowl, which can feel very limiting at times, but just come out of that forest or come out of the fish tank and say, okay, again, if I do anything and I won't fail at it, that's what I would do. That's a good indication as to how you can increase value.
I like to ask that question for me is similar to saying, if you had a magic wand,
Love it.
what would you do with it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe last question here as we wrap up. Is there a particular book or like a quote that you kind of refer to or point to folks most often? A book or quote? I'll leave it up to
So
you.
the two things that come to mind for me, I don't know who said it, but nothing great is built on 40 hours a week. And if you love it and you're passionate about it, go
Yeah.
get it. And the other maybe point or quote or concept from Atomic Habits, right? The theory of increasing 1% or improving 1% every day. Just a little bit every day. It compounds.
Awesome. Well, Karl, I think we could keep on talking about this because it's just good fun.
Yeah.
But for today, we'll have to just put a bookmark in it and come back. But thanks for hopping on and sharing some of your experience and definitely your expertise in all of this. And we'll keep in touch.
Nathan, thanks so much. Great to be here. Have a great day.